Fionnula, that was absolutely gorgeous, and thank you so very much. The person I forgot to forget who set all of this up was Larry Bowe.
Mary Pavlidis, our Honorary Secretary. Whose reign is coming to an end in a couple of weeks. She's had 3 years as Honorary Secretary. She's done a fabulous job. And she's going to be a very hard act to follow. Thanks very much, Mary. And our Chair, Mary Freehill, who's here in front of me. And she's done a fabulous job leading the committee through the year. Also, our staff, our management staff, Philip and Jess, who do a lot of work behind the scenes to make things like this possible. Tom Hayes, the chef, and his team of waiters, and Lar and Ed, who do a fabulous job in the park. And really, I think this sort of event is what the Arts Club is all about, celebrating fabulous people like Fionnula, who contributed so much to the cultural life of the city and the country. But we're going to hear from the woman who Jim said everybody wanted to get off with in the Abbey, Gordon Malloy.
I saw her waiting for this.
I'm a bit alike because I have to read.
Yes.
Good.
Nice. Hand the light.
Oh, you want the light?
And everybody shield your eyes.
No, it's a great.
How much? Too much.
No, not for the ring.
She wants light. He wants some light.
No, I just want to be able to read.
Is that all right?
So, perfect. Thanks. So, Fionnula Flannigan. Now, is there a fairy tale about a fantastical creature that's always just out of your sight or just whipping around a corner ahead of you? Because for years that was Fionnula. She was that magical creature that I could never catch up with. When I began, she had gone off to that land of myths and magic, which was Hollywood, where of course the sun always shone, where the rest of us stayed at home in damp and safe Ireland. And then we were about to do The Ferryman on Broadway. And Sam Mendes was having a problem with immigration, a bit like now, and had to cast an actor with a right to work in the States. So I suggested Fionnula Flannigan, thinking, now is my chance. And the next thing, there she was, in the flesh, playing the other sister. That was in 2018, and the beginning of a new friendship in both our lives. Compounded by discovering that we'd both been to the same school a very, very long time ago at the other end of our lives. Scullwera and Marlborough Street, miles from either of our homes, and Donecarney and Malahide. Now, Fionnula is one of life's great hostesses and party givers, as has already been said. Ferryman had a cast of over 30 actors, not counting a goose, a rabbit, a 6-month-old child, and all their attendants, and their carers and their chaperones, so there wasn't a spare inch of space backstage. Fionnula and a young actor and I, Carla Langley, we shared a dressing room, which was slightly wider than the door into it. About as long as the average kitchen table. Now, I am anally tidy, and Fionnula and Carla were both exuberant in their dressing table habits. So Fionnula, as a compulsive carer and provider of all sorts of things for everybody, she bought a very expensive, state-of-the-art coffee machine, and she installed it on the windowsill at her end of the dressing room, which was the far end from where the door was. So she invited everyone to come and have coffee, who fancied it, whenever they wanted. The upshot was a constant stream, of course, of actors who were manoeuvring their way down to the other end of the dressing room. And to let anyone in, I had to step out. Which, anyway, I like calm and peace. recite the names of the hunger strikers that had died. We were at peak coffee demand, I think, this time. I began the litany of the dead to a packed house, and I couldn't remember a single one, so I made them up. But 13 is a lot, and I couldn't make up all the names, so I began to use friends' names. The other 20 or so members of the cast who were on stage at the time were horrified at the beginning. But as time went on, they began to recognise people's names. They began to, the whole thing descended into chaos. Staggered off the stage and burst into tears and said to the stage management, "You have to help me, you just have to do something." So they gave me a tiny cubbyhole under the stairs. So peace and calm was restored. Now, Fionnula, nothing fazed Fionnula. She was tireless. After the show, the security man would let me out a side door so that I wouldn't have to walk into the crowds of people who were waiting to greet people at the stage door. Fionnula, after a stellar performance, a demanding performance in a 3-hour show, would exit like a queen and walk straight over to the waiting crowds and spend as long as necessary talking to them, satisfying requests for autographs, having chats, handshakes. I was amazed. And I asked her how she did it. And she said it was a duty, that these people had paid to see us, and we owed them the courtesy of meeting those that wanted to. And that it was part of our job. I felt humbled by her passion and her commitment and professionalism. So we've done a few films together since then, and even holidayed together during one of them, and we're making up for those lost times gone by in our youths. Fionnula, as has been said already, is generous to an exceptional degree, and not only to those who work with her, bringing in homemade cake and soda cake to feed everyone, or taking everybody to her lovely home in Wicklow, or sending presents to people for no reason other than that she thinks you might like this particular thing. She's also wonderfully generous to play opposite. She's generous both in her giving, in her acting, but also in what she says and what she does, in praising with an open heart anyone she thinks is talented and good. In fact, heartful, huge-hearted, warm, and full of love and loyalty to those she's attached to is how I would describe my friend Fionnula. I'm proud to have caught that magical creature by the coattails at last. Roma Cree, a Corradinish.
Very good. The only words I'm going to forget like that was when they're all lying when I'm dead. No lying when I'm dead.
Could we please have the star of the evening up here?
Yes.
No better one.
Good woman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Fionnula Flannigan.
Thank you so very much, and thank you everybody for being here. You know, everything that Derval has said is untrue. Got it off the internet. And everything that Jim said is not true. And everything that Lelia said is not completely true. No, and they got it off the internet too.
it to
It's every actor's terror. I will switch off the light.
Dark.
I'm going to tell you one story, and it's amazing because it's how life doesn't imitate art, but it joins it somehow. And I have a granddaughter who, at the age of 14, ran away from home. This was when I was living in California. And she ran away from home, and we had detectives out looking for her, etc. And finally we had to kidnap her and get her to agree to go to a school. It was a lockdown school in Colorado. Now that sounds horrible, but in fact, not because it's Colorado, but because it's a lockdown school. But in fact, it wasn't as awful as you might think. And she excelled and did very well, and it was the makings of her. However, she called me at one point when she was there about a month, and she said, "Grandma, could you come up and give a talk to the people who are in my group?" And I said, "Yes, sure, but what do you want me to talk about?" She said, "Just talk about show business and things you've been in and etc." And I said, "Oh, all right." And so we went up, my husband and I, we flew up to Colorado Springs and we went to the school. Now, let me hasten to add that most of these children could not go home. They were there until they were 16, and then they were released onto the world, and it is to be hoped that they were released into jobs of some kind or back to school, but they could not go home because their home life was so awful and dangerous that they couldn't. Anyway, Kalina, who was my granddaughter, was she was the eldest in her circle of friends, and they all assembled in the biggest room they had was the lobby, and so they all assembled in the lobby, and they were sitting for the most part on the floor, and some of them were sitting, you know, on benches and whatever, and a few of them sitting on top of a table. Anyway, I gave a talk on just makeup and hair and on parts that I played, etc., and tried to keep it as interesting for, you know, these kids were aged about 11, truth be told, even though in years they were 15 and 16, but they were very young. So at the end of my talk, I said, "Does anybody have any questions?" Total dead silence. Nobody had a question. Surely somebody wants to know something that I haven't touched on? Nothing. And then one tiny little hand goes up from the kids sitting on the floor. And this little girl said to me, "What's Brad Pitt really like?" And I know that he's lived here in wherever, in Dalkey, when he was shooting, but it was such a wonderful question that I decided then and there that if ever in my dotage, if I write my autobiography, I'll call it, "What's Brad Pitt?" So, Shinna Will, I can't get to the brilliance of Jim or of Lelia or of my dear friend Derfla. But suffice it to say that we've been through many a film together and worked together, and I still treasure that day an afternoon we spent in Bruges. Was it Bruges?
Oh.
In a bar in Bruges where, anyway. So, thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the chef for such a wonderful dinner, an imaginative dinner, and for the marvelous waiters who served us all and kept us happy, at least kept me happy. And so thank you very much, Mary Papalides. It's an impossible name to say, and I spell. But thank you, Mary, for everything you did to make it possible for us to be here. And thank you so much for the introduction by the treasurer, whose name I have totally forgotten. You should never forget the money man's name. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. It was a real treat, and something I shall never forget and treasure always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you have a chair.